how they respond to middle-class white people in DuPage County is very, very different than how people get responded to out here. So when I had an interaction and asked, what's your badge number? Who do you represent? He told me to stay back, but he didn't swear at me. He didn't threaten me. He answered my questions. He made eye contact. He wasn't threatening in the same way. Whereas here, you get pushed, you get knocked down, you get threatened.
No Taco Tuesday this week for Donald Trump. He expanded the airstrikes on Iran to include Tehran, the capital, included Tabriz, included Shiraz, reports of attacks in Isfahan, military sites, military production facilities, energy infrastructure. Iran also responded, reports that Kuwait is so badly hit by Iranian attacks that it is having trouble keeping its electricity grid. It's 114, 115 degrees in Kuwait and humid this time of the year. So very tough for the people living there. But as the Iranians promised, they will respond to any attacks on civilian infrastructure with attacks on civilian infrastructure of the allied Gulf states, the ones that the United States is using to launch attacks and to launch airstrikes from. I'm Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands. You can subscribe at borzu.substack.com. I'm also on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Today, later on in the show, I have an interview with my longtime friend, and a professor at the College of DuPage here in Chicagoland, David Goldberg. He is a professor of political science, and we're going to talk a little bit about Chicago politics, as well as the recent commentary by Nick Fuentes, the right-wing streamer, about the phenomenon of the rising left and the activism of the left and the energy of the left. David is a activist as well as a union leader in the Chicago area. He is involved in union activities with the teachers union at his college, as well as in counter ICE activities in the western suburbs of Chicago, Berwyn in particular, which is the same town where Nick Fuentes produces his videos and streams from. As a matter of fact, he lives like 4 blocks away from Nick Fuentes. And we talk about Nick Fuentes, the Pope, and ICE, which is an interesting Chicago combination. And I'm going to apologize in advance for some of the audio problems during that video. I'm going to try to do better with these interviews. This was the first sort of live in-person video, not done through laptops. And hopefully I'll get the hang of it as time goes on. And if you feel like becoming a paid subscriber and helping me out a little bit more, that'll give me more time and resources to improve the production quality here. So on to Iran for just a little bit. You had these attacks all over Iran on Tuesday. And there's also this talk about hitting this mountain. It's called Pickaxe Mountain. That's the English name of it. I forget the Persian name of it. I forget, it's Kuhe something. I forget. But it's a mountain near the Natanz enrichment facility in central Iran. And apparently this is where some of the Iranian uranium enrichment centrifuges were moved, and it's a very deep underground bunker. And Donald Trump seems to have gotten fixated on this Pickaxe Mountain for some reason. I think it's just garbage. It's ridiculous. It's just some neocon talking point. Some guy, his name is David Albright, he made a big deal out of this, and he's one of these neocon think tankers, and he made a big deal out of this, and then all the other neocon think tankers retweeted him. They're all like this little buzzing hive of this clique of people who are promoting this, and it's just a game, because whatever, who cares? Who cares if Donald Trump obliterates this mountain, manages to drop so much ordnance onto this mountain that it turns the whole mountain into dust? It's still not going to open up the Strait of Hormuz, and it's still not going to prevent Iran from going nuclear at some point. It's just a red herring. It's a way of continuing the escalation trap. That's what the neocon shills in Washington and other places, that's what they want. They just want to keep Donald Trump, stringing him along. They just want to keep stringing Donald Trump along. Give him little targets, give him little places to hit, little things to do, and then they can clap like seals every time he hits it, and he gets a little bit of a affirmation, a little bit of a dopamine hit, because his base is fraying. Tucker Carlson hates him. The Groypers hate him. The bloggers, the podcasters, the bros, Joe Rogan hates him. The only people who occasionally clap like little seals for him and give him approval is this narrow brittle sliver of neocon shills paid millions of dollars every year by various pro-Israel foundations and billionaires. This is an industry. It's a little crappy industry centered in Washington with tentacles in London and Paris, all leading back to Benjamin Netanyahu's office in Jerusalem, all part of this kind of long-term Likud project. And they see this war as part of the fulfillment of their dream. And they are desperate. They're panicking because the war is not going well. The American people are opposed to it. And they know that they're never going to get a chance after the Iranians close the Strait of Hormuz. They know they're never going to get a chance to get back this war. No American president is ever going to do this. So this is their last chance to fulfill their long held dream of an American regime change war against Iran. They're not going to stop until Donald Trump sends 500,000 to 1 million troops to Iran to overthrow the regime, because that's their only reason for existence. And once this war ends, if there is a truce, if Donald Trump is impeached, if he's thrown out of office, if he, heaven forbid, has a heart attack and drops dead, this war is going to be over. J.D. Vance isn't going to pursue it. Marco Rubio is not going to be dumb enough to pursue it. He's not in line to be president anyway. So I think that that's basically the gist of the matter here. That's what Pickaxe Mountain is about. It's just a big pile of BS. There's also been other developments. There continues to be this threat by the Houthis in Yemen to close the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. This is the gateway, as has been explained, to the Red Sea and to the Suez Canal. This is a critical choke point worldwide, not just for oil, not just for gas, not just for energy supplies, but for shipments of everything. It lets ships go from Asia to Europe and around the world without having to pass through this arduous journey through the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. If the Houthis close this choke point off, that's very, very bad for the global economy. It will add costs, it will add expenses, but it will not totally block off oil shipments because the oil will have another route to go around. It'll just take longer and cost more. I spoke a little bit about the latest developments in the Iran war with India's NewsX World in a recent interview. Have a listen or watch.
The US says its military operations has concluded, yet Iran continues to launch retaliatory strikes. Does this indicate the conflict is entering a new phase, or is there still a significant risk of further escalation, do you think, given the fact that Marco Rubio said Iran are sending signals? What signals do you think they could also be?
Well, I think there is still a danger of the conflict escalating considerably. We're not even near the tempo of the attacks and counterattacks that we saw in March and early April, in which the world was on the verge of a real crisis at that point, with the threats and counter threats to target regional energy infrastructure, causing a years-long recession. There does appear to be some kind of diplomatic initiative going on. There are hints that the Qataris are leading this effort, trying to get this conflict to stop. And there are rumors and reports about a possible 10-day ceasefire that could lead to a longer ceasefire. Now, this could just also be two things. The Americans trying to manipulate the markets and soothe the markets and keep the stock markets from plummeting. And you saw some reaction, some positive reaction to that on the part of equity markets. And it could also be on the Iranian part, just an attempt to look good in the international community. No one wants a country, and no one likes a country that is recalcitrant and doesn't want to negotiate. So even if you don't want to negotiate and you have no intention of negotiating, it's good to give out signals that you are willing to negotiate, so you're the good guy and they're the bad guy.
Absolutely. And also, both Washington and Tehran say diplomacy remains possible despite these ongoing military exchanges. How realistic are these negotiations, do you think? Do you think we are anywhere near, or do you think we are so far from it that there's no point really talking about it just yet?
Ellie, there's a very real possibility that there'll be negotiations and war at the same time. The negotiations will go on for a few days, then the war will resume, and the war will go on for a few weeks, and then the negotiations. And this could go on in this cycle for years. That is generally how wars go. Even World War I, there was fits and starts and ceasefires and truces and various attempts at diplomatic maneuvering, and that war went on for 6 years. So, I mean, especially as well as in Ukraine, there's always diplomatic initiatives going on, and this is happening in Switzerland or this is happening in Istanbul, and they're trying to talk at the same time as they're fighting. And I have a feeling that this is going to slide into that kind of conflict of just a long, drawn out affair and never any conclusion, because you have two sides that are still remain very far apart on fundamental issues and red lines.
Absolutely. And the United States says it protected hundreds of commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Has this operation achieved its objective of securing global shipping, or do the continuing Iranian attacks suggest the threat remains?
I don't remember if you said 89 or 189 ships have passed since the beginning of May. But if that number is accurate, that's pretty pathetic. If either of those numbers are accurate, that's pretty pathetic. Because if you're talking about 3 ships a day maximum over the course of 3 months, 2.5 months actually. And that it might sound good if you just give a big number. I don't remember if it was 189 or 89, but if you divide it by the number of days that was since early May, and you compare it to the normal transit volumes during normal times of 130 ships a day, that's pretty pathetic. I got to say, it's not impressive at all. And it shows just how much of a crisis there is. Strategic oil reserves around the world are being depleted. There is reports out today that the Americans have like 43 days of reserves left before they start really suffering. And there is some kind of bedlam, as Donald Trump put it, with regard to energy prices and fuel prices and so on. So I think that even by their own measures, by the U.S. measures, that's not such a great and impressive number.
Absolutely. And lastly, with regional states such as Bahrain and Kuwait now directly affected by Iranian strikes, how concerned should Gulf allies be about being drawn deeper into a broader US-Iran confrontation, deeper than what they already are in?
Well, I think that they are very concerned. Bahrain and Kuwait are providing their land for American strikes on Iran. They say they have no choice, or they try to downplay what they're doing, but they put themselves in this position at this point. I'm not sure if there's a lot of sympathy for them. On the other hand, it's interesting that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are not being targeted by the Iranians, at least not very much. And that could be because the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates have the wherewithal and the diplomatic muscle to tell the Americans simply no. Whereas perhaps Kuwait and Bahrain, being smaller, weaker, in the case of Kuwait, very dependent on the United States. Historically, it was the Americans that freed Kuwait from the occupation of Saddam Hussein in 1990, 1991, and they have a debt of gratitude to the Americans for that. They're in no position, perhaps, to say no to the Americans when the Americans want to fire short-range missiles or launch aircraft from their territory.
Iran is now directly targeting commercial oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Does this represent a major escalation in the strategy for military retaliation to economic warfare, with nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passing through this strategic waterway? How quickly could these attacks translate into higher global energy prices and wider economic disruption?
Very quickly. They could translate very quickly into higher prices. But because just of the signaling and the message to the Americans and to energy traders that this route is definitely closed. Look, from the Iranian point of view, the memorandum of understanding said that the Americans will give a certain measure of control over the Strait of Hormuz to the Iranians, and in exchange, the Iranians will not charge any transit fees for 60 days. And so the Iranians took that to mean that they have control over the Strait of Hormuz. They just can't charge fees for that transiting. This was their leverage. And the Americans, it appeared to the Iranians, were trying to undermine that agreement. We're trying to take away their leverage and try to create this alternative way for ships to pass through the Strait of Oman without getting Iranian authorization. And so they are blocking it because they feel like this is their one little place where they can exercise some control over this massive nuclear superpower. So if they give that up, they feel like they give up everything, and the Americans will just be able to walk all over them, resume the war, and have their cake and eat it too. Attack Iran, launch a regime change war, while not affecting energy prices. So that's the Iranian logic, and that's why they will continue to attack those ships as they use that Omani passageway.
The IRGC says these vessels were using an unauthorized transit lane under US protection. Could the commercial shipping increasingly become caught in the middle now of this crossfire? And what options do shipping companies have? As we've just heard that the Houthis are also now trying to block off their part. So what is going to happen now? What is physically...
Well, the Houthis have said that they will close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to Saudi shipping in response to Saudi attacks on Yemeni Houthi-controlled infrastructure. So I think that that's an issue there as well. But if the Yemeni Houthis were to exercise their control over the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and close that transit route, yeah, that would have a really huge impact, because the Saudis are getting about, I think, 5 to 7 million barrels of oil out of the Bab el-Mandeb every day now. And if that were to be taken offline, that would mean that you would have basically 20 million barrels a day that used to come out of the Persian Gulf region completely not be able to come out then. And that would have a huge impact, as you can imagine, on the global economy, on replenishing oil supplies. There would be what is called demand destruction. People would start changing their habits as prices started going up. They would perhaps permanently change their habits. That would mean there would be more electric cars. That would mean that people would stop going on vacation, stop taking road trips, and so on. And that would create habits that would further just shrink the global economy, shrink global GDP, and that would be probably very bad for equity markets, and it would be bad for ordinary people trying to live their lives. And now for the first part of my interview with David Goldberg, my good friend and a professor of political science at the College of DuPage in the western suburbs of Chicago. We talk about ICE, we talk about Nick Fuentes, and we also talk about the Pope, the new Pope, who is also from Chicago. It's a Chicago story, and I'm in Chicago this week and next week as well. So I thought it would be a good idea to give everyone a little sense of place. And again, apologies for the bad sound quality at some points through the interview. Hold on, it does get better at the end. Hey. So I am here with a college professor and a longtime friend, David Goldberg. I've actually, as I mentioned in the introduction, I've known David since we were children together in the south suburbs of Chicago. David, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Borju.
It's such a pleasure. So let me just put on this little video. I thought that would be interesting. We are in Berwyn, Illinois now. This is the home of the famous American right-wing streamer, broadcaster, Nick Fuentes. Let me just play this video for you in which Nick Fuentes gives his assessment of like U.S. politics right now, as well as something that is near and dear to David's heart, like the American left and, you know, kind of a progressive politics. I walked into David's house here in the western suburbs of Chicago, really close western suburbs of Chicago. And on the front of the house was a sign, one sign for union education and union leaders in the education sector, of which David, a professor at a very well-known community college in the Chicago area, he's a union leader there, as well as a sign kind of alerting people in this area about what to do if you see an ICE agent, like literally on the front lawn of the home here. So I can imagine what an ICE agent pulling down this road would think of that. But what do you think of it? Let me play this video for you here separately.
On the left, they are radicalizing. Now that Trump is in power and the way that Trump is messing around with things, it's making the left more radical. The radicals on the left are winning. They're young, they've got energy, they're pissed off about the economy, and they get to be in the opposition, which has a lot of benefits. And so whereas on the right, we're mourning Lindsey Graham, on the left, they're electing like 100 communists. Okay? On the right wing, we're taking people that were groypers and turning them into neocons. Trump is taking people that would have been against the war in Iran and making them support it. People that would have been against the Epstein files, making them defend the cover-up of the Epstein files. On the left, they are creating like a communist revolution. They're taking the initiative on the AIPAC issue, on healthcare, on housing, even on border security. Graham Plattner, who won his primary with 70% of the vote, he said we need border security and a pathway to citizenship. So on the left, they're finding their voice. They're finding a younger, more radical, a synthesis. They're dispensing the worst aspects of the woke. You get a guy like Zohran Mamdani that Trump gets along with. A guy like Zohran Mamdani, who's a socialist Muslim, who's in favor of queer liberation and abolishing ICE, and he's like universally liked and popular, and he's under the age of 70, and Trump will bro down with him. Those are the developments on the left. And the left lucked out because their octogenarian left office. And the successor, who is an establishment candidate, didn't win. So these 4 years under Trump are incubating a winning left. The left was disorganized, destroyed, totally ineffective and incompetent when Trump won the election. Now they're gaining momentum and gathering steam.
So what do you think of what he's saying here? This is like a very dangerous person by all accounts. Nick Fuentes, he literally sometimes he says he's edgelording or whatever, but he literally espouses Nazi ideology. And yet in this assessment of the U.S. politics, he sounds like someone who could be on CNN giving an assessment. What do you think of his comments there?
I mean, I think the thing that's frightening about him and endearing is that he's smart and insightful, knows his audience, understands the demo that he's reaching, and also understands in a broader sense what's been going on with the far right in this country. I think people use the term, from my perspective, academically, but also historically, people use terms like left and communism and socialism in a flippant way. What he's talking about is essentially more like a New Deal Democrat. What the Democratic Party was, less than 100 years ago is really what that was. So he's being flippant about that, but I think he's right to say that there's a lot more energy. When you think about young people, when you think about Mamdani, when you think about anti-APEC, concerns about Zionism, the kind of ICE stuff that we see here in our community, that's led by young people. And I see that at school. Those conversations are exciting. So I think that he's correct. There is a lot more. The enthusiasm has changed so much because going back to the 2016 presidential election, it was all the rise of gropers and the rise of everything else online that was the rise of the far right that were edgelording, as you said, but then also far more serious and far more dangerous in terms of what they were advocating. And then now we've seen, in part because of the failure of the Democratic Party in the last couple of elections, or much longer than that, but just most recently, I think young people recognize that these parties are empty husks and they need to move on and do something else. And that's happening in real time in front of us. So for me, that's exciting. He sees that. He's intuitive enough to recognize that among what should be his demographic.
Just to be clear to everyone, edgelording is this kind of, it's basically testing the limits of acceptable speech. It's a hint of irony meant as a way of being provocative and so on, meaning something but not really meaning it. Among the examples that people have cited as edgelording is like when Nick Fuentes goes on and on and on about how much he respected Stalin, and then in the next episode he's basically going like Heil Hitler. He's playing a game. I think that'll last for a few more years, this game, as long as he's 27 and looks like he's 18. Maybe he can get away with that. When he starts going gray and he starts doing that, that's going to come off as like very David Duke-ish, no matter whatever he calls it. Someone in his 30s and 40s can't get away with that kind of irresponsible rhetoric. Someone who looks like an elf perhaps can. So I think that one couple things I wanted to just talk about. Just basically, you were talking about ICE in this neighborhood, and in Berwyn there is like this is a community that is like this kind of working class, a lower middle class, mostly community that is right on the western edge of Chicago, and it is a huge Hispanic population here, a large Latino population here, and there has been some ICE activity here. Can you just say what has happened here in Berwyn?
Sure.
Isn't that main detention center here in Berwyn?
Broadview is 15 minutes from here.
Yeah.
We work on a regular basis. They have on a very regular basis.
And that's the main detention center for ICE in Cook County. Yeah.
Well, it's not just the detention facility. That's also where they deploy for the day.
Oh, wow.
So then we're able to take pictures of license plates and see who's out in the community, and they create databases around that.
Yeah.
So I think January.
Well, I think Donald Trump wants to name you a domestic terrorist for that. And that's another thing we can talk about too. Stephen Miller and this campaign to did you hear about this? He summoned all these foreign diplomats and lectured them in Washington about the need to go after left-wing terrorism. I think he has you in mind, David.
Yeah, definitely. And it's worth noting before I respond directly to your question that Nick Fuentes records about 4 blocks from where we are right now.
4 blocks from
Yeah, I passed his home on a regular basis.
Oh, wow.
There's a sign in front that says no trespassing, and I know that he has private security there. He had an interaction with the resident about a year ago.
Well, that was on a video,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that he pushed the woman.
Yes. He maced her and threw her phone out of her hand. And Berwyn police were a little reluctant to get involved. So this is well known in the community. And when Fuentes was supposed to show up for his court date, there were a lot of other people from Berwyn who showed up to show our strong opposition to what he represented. He didn't show up. We've seen an ICE presence in our community really on a very regular basis. So that is business and communities, think barbershops, think bakeries, and then also schools. And so on a regular basis, we showed up where we have information. We believe that there's going to be an ICE presence to try to pick parents or just anybody who's in the community. We've seen this also that people are selling tamales on the corner. People in the community, they're shopping anybody. We've seen starting last January when we first saw that, and now it's been on a very regular basis. I think there's been an incredible community response around this. It really is unifying, and I think it's very gratifying for me as a white man to see young folks that are really taking the lead on this and have boundless energy. They are focused on nothing but their community and their family. There's no ego, there's no power play, like the sort of things that have in the way of the white Democratic left in this country for 50 years or more seem to be absent in this. These are people that are focused on what's going on. They're clear-eyed about what this is and what this is not. And I think that's kind of a leap from maybe our growing up and thinking about ideology and thinking about politics. These folks can move.
Yeah.
There's no pretense about what this is and what this is not. This is violence in our community on a daily basis, where we see people are kidnapped on a daily basis by mass people who don't have warrants. I think part of what we're trying to do is educate and talk about the difference between a judicial warrant and a administrative warrant, trying to provide legal assistance for families, trying to provide financial assistance for families. When the primary breadwinner is kidnapped out of the home and you've got kids or grandparents there, that's the kind of stuff that people are dealing with on a daily basis. And it is frightening and incredible to hear that this is taking place and then to see it on a daily basis. So between here, where I live, and Berwyn, and even more in Cicero, neighboring community has had even more of it. And so that has been, on a daily basis, we're monitoring these behaviors, using a variety of things, also monitoring helicopters, because I live across the street from a prominent shopping plaza where when the DHS helicopters would show up, then ICE would show up right afterwards. So there was patterns that we could begin to sort of discern that made it possible for folks to come out in large numbers and blow whistles and give out red cards to talk about what people's constitutional rights are and to hold people accountable for their actions. I think sort of two anecdotes here briefly. One is how ICE acts here in Berwyn and Cicero versus when it's in DuPage County, closer to where I teach at the College of DuPage.
The rich people.
We've been there, and you get a bunch of people that look more like me in the community. We've done similar actions in the western suburbs, and when ICE shows up, we were at an apartment complex in Carroll Stream, and they got carpet installers. They were just randomly sweeping through an apartment building, and there were a couple of guys in a van who were carpet installers that were kidnapped. How they respond to middle-class white people in DuPage County is very, very different than how people get responded to out here. So when I had an interaction and asked, what's your badge number? Who do you represent? He told me to stay back, but he didn't swear at me. He didn't threaten me. He answered my questions. He made eye contact. He wasn't threatening in the same way. Whereas here, you get pushed, you get knocked down, you get threatened, and lots of other things. It is in the 10 miles between here and DuPage County, it is day and night. That is one anecdote that I think is very telling about what's going on here. They're still very active in DuPage County on a daily basis. Yeah, all the time. It's different. They've learned, right? They now have technology to blur out their license plates. They're learning, right, in real time about that. Also, they have a ton more money to spend on these things. The other anecdote that I think is important is at the Morton High School nearby, a variety of folks went, and we went to hand out Know Your Rights, basically constitutional, bullet point sheet on First, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth Amendment rights to hand that out to students, because this is right where ICE had been very active in that shopping center that I mentioned. And when we showed up, 5 or 6 parents basically in the community with a bunch of documents, the police were called, and the Berwyn police were very threatening. I have on video, they're calling me names, they're threatening me, they're threatening my wife, they're threatening our friends, who are distributing literature, and that was supported by by the high school administrators that have a kind of a well-known history of questionable practices with regards to race and ethnicity, for sure. And that is something that we went to the city council and talked about. Why are Berwyn police in violation of Illinois law? Why are they working hand in glove with ICE, which is prohibited according to J.B. Pritzker? We've seen that at Broadview on a regular basis, and we see that here all the time when local cops and ICE are dapping it out, and like clearly they're in communication, they know each other, and that's a real problem, especially when the FBI has now told ICE they do not have to worry about prosecutions, which is what came out this morning in the New York Times. I think all these things call into question. We are a society of laws, right? If some people are not going to be held accountable for their actions with recent shootings and all the violence, then I think that raises bigger questions about what's taking place institutionally.
Yeah. Is that what he's talking about, what you're describing here? Is that what Nick Fuentes is talking about, this energy that is being unleashed? Is this why he is freaking out? And he said other stuff, too, about, man, look at the number of people who are knocking on doors for these democratic socialists in New York. This is the kind of energy we haven't seen in the U.S. In a long time. And you saw in that video, he's like really angry about this. He's not happy that a bunch of communists, they're electing hundreds of communists, et cetera. Is that the energy that has been unleashed by the actions of the Trump administration?
Well, for sure. I mean, I think it's at different levels. What I'm talking about is more mutual aid grassroots community organization.
But this was not going on 10 years ago.
No, this wasn't going on 3 years ago. Exactly. I think previous precedent, this was not going on. Even the first Trump administration, that wasn't going on. But I think at the other level, you do see, like in Wisconsin, the gubernatorial for the primary, the Democratic primary, there's these questions about far left candidates.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And their definition of far left is not one that you would have drawn up like I just read about the story.
Yeah.
And how Republicans are funding, they're basically putting out ads that say she's too far left, because they're running those ads in Milwaukee and Madison because they want those Democratic voters to vote for her, to undermine the traditional mainstream corporate Democratic candidates. But I also think like these distinctions may not matter a whole lot, but probably to your audience they will. You know, Democratic Socialists of America are not taken seriously by real leftists. I'm not disparaging them, but it's true. They're kind of like what the Democratic Party was. This is
like Park Slope Democrats.
Yes.
I mean, like they're Oak Park, Evanston Democrats.
Yes. Just it's George McGovern at the
exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is not the left. You know.
Right. And friends of ours that are active in those circles are dismissive of the DSA. And I think, you know, that's
sure.
Those kind of internecine warfare among parties on the left have been endemic for a very long time.
We also have this other character from this part of the world, from the south side of Chicago, the southwest side of Chicago, that has recently made waves on the global stage. I wonder if you have any thoughts on the Pope, who is also he's also a South Side guy, from the southwest suburb, not suburbs, but the actually from the city, from that part of, like, I guess it's like Garfield Park, that area, that kind of working class white enclave. Is it still there, that enclave?
Garfield Park less so, but there are enclaves for white city workers. There are places where cops have to live in order to have residency requirements.
But he's from that area. Yeah. He's from that. Remember that time in high school we went to like a anti-Klan march, and that was that area. That was the area where the Pope is from. What do you think of that? He's like coming out with these interesting, as a political scientist, watching this guy emerge and make these kind of controversial and sweeping assessments of the current political landscape, U.S. immigration policy, attitude towards migrants in general worldwide, also stuff like AI and the threat it poses to humanity. That's kind of interesting. That also kind of came out of Chicago, or maybe not so interesting. What do you think?
Very much so. I think the fact that he chose as his own Aurelios, the one that we used to go to in the south suburbs. His Aurelios is the one in Homewood, the original, the first Aurelios.
Yeah.
So that
he went to Aurelio's Pizza.
Yeah. That's where he goes when he's in town.
Oh, amazing.
And I've seen videos of people bringing him Marino's pizza at the Vatican.
Really is interesting.
I think that what you're speaking to is that, and I'm not in a position to speak about Vatican doctrine and the infallibility of the Pope, but I do think that what we've seen with Pope Leo is someone who is very much a Pope of the people, that he's accessible, in part because of age, but also because of his station in life that you mentioned, sort of more working class. I think that he is, strongly vested in these communities, and he's also able to tie that together to long-standing issues about immigration, about personhood, about human rights, about war that are age-old issues in the Roman Catholic Church. So in a sense, these things are not new, but he is articulating them in a way that differentiates him from John Paul II and the sort of more right-wing, not everything fits in that spectrum neatly, and I don't necessarily would put him sort of on the left, but he's not afraid to engage in these conversations with J.D. Vance or with Trump. He's not. I think what's refreshing is he's not seeking, but he also doesn't shy away from these big questions, and he's able to very clearly identify what he sees as the role of the church in this. I think that is kind of refreshing, and Francis, I think, played a role in that as well. Coming from Argentina, having a history in the Dirty War, like having kind of roots in that community.
He did missionary work in Latin America.
Yeah, very much so.
Well. Y habla perfectamente español.
Yes.
He speaks perfect Spanish.
He was working in human rights at a time when there was a Maoist guerrilla group in Peru that was targeting people, everyone, certainly the Catholic Church. So I think
Shining path.
Sendero. His background, his history, but how he lives it in real time every day, I think, is refreshing. That he is a voice for the voiceless, right? For marginalized groups. I think his views in terms of women and trans folks leave a lot to be desired. And I don't want to be an advocate for incrementalism, but I think this is a long way from Benedict. Yeah. This is a long way from recent popes who were explicitly siding with powerful institutions and advocating for the status quo.
Thank you so much for listening in. I'm Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at borzu.substack.com. I'm also on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube and on Spotify.